In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Dobson's Learn to Read New Testament Greek. Now, this is a book that a lot of you have asked me to look at. This is the third edition. We're going to take a look at it in this video. So, let's get into it. So, it's been a while since I reviewed a Greek grammar, and don't worry, there are still plenty of grammars for me to take a look at, and I haven't by any stretch finished working through these. There's so many still to look at, and I still get requests from you all the time asking me to look at this grammar or that grammar. And one of the ones that I get a lot of requests about is John Dobson's Learn to Read New Testament Greek. Now, this is really a very different grammar. One of the things that I've noticed is that within the Grammar Translate family of grammars, there's really not as much variety in a lot of ways between some of the grammars as we might like. And I think this is I think it reinforces the value of the Grammar Translate method to some extent, but at the same time it also shows there's a lot of scope within this approach to learning Greek for changing it. Now, as you've seen recently, I've had some thoughts on the natural language approach to learning Greek, and this is actually quite applicable to John Dobson's grammar, because this grammar really, in a sense, is kind of not even really a Grammar Translate grammar, if you want to call it that. It kind of is, but it's different. And this is one of the things that, I kind of like this. This is actually really quite a compelling grammar in its own way. So the approach that this grammar takes is that it's kind of not taking the traditional Grammar Translate approach. There are no paradigms to learn in this. There's minimal vocabulary to learn, but there's quite a lot that you can learn. It's not a small grammar, 330-ish pages of actual grammar. It's 2 chapters on the alphabet, essentially, and how words are sounded and formed. And then you really just get into it. And really, when you start getting into it, you start with verbs, which I think is the great way to do this. But one of the things you notice about this is that as you go through the chapters, you don't find in the chapter headings a lot of technical jargon. You're not going to find in there anywhere things such as participles or infinitives or the genitive or dative. Well, you will, but not until much, much later in the grammar. Really, this is just going to start telling you this is how the language works. It's not going to get you lost on all of the different technical terms, particularly during the beginning stages. And I think this is really one of the beauties of this grammar. So you're going to start off learning, basic sentence structure. You're not going to know what you're learning from a grammatical point of view. So you're going to learn about verbs, you'll learn about basic nouns, but they're not going to be tagged as verbs and nouns. You're not going to learn about present tense or aorist tense forms, at least not until much later. And really, it's not until you get to about a page 150, I think, that he actually starts to even describe the tense forms you've already learned. So by the time you get to page 150, you've learned the present tense, you've learned the aorist tense, you've learned the imperfect tense form, and so on, but you actually don't know what they're called until you get to about page 150. So it's really an interesting way of approaching it. This is the way he does this in this is really by cycling over things over and over and over again, particularly through the first early chapters. You know a small number of words, and you get to see those words over and over again. You're translating the different forms of them again over and over and over. And again, I think the purpose of this grammar, the whole point of what they're trying to do here, what Dr. Dobson is trying to do here, is really to encourage you to learn by recognition rather than by using tables and charts. And I think this is really helpful. This is a great strength, and I think this sets this apart from a lot of other grammars. Another thing about the approach this grammar takes is it starts, the first chapter or so, you're going to learn about verbs. Within 2 or 3 chapters, you're then learning about participles. Now, it's not the only time you learn about participles. When you're in the present tense, you're learning about verbs, then participles. These are adjectival participles. I don't call them that, but that's what they are. And then later on, you're going to learn about adverbial participles. And when you start getting into adverbial participles, apart from the present tense form, you're actually going to be learning like aorist participles before you learn the aorist indicative, which is fascinating to me, just to sort of see how that all works. So this is a really interesting approach, and it's very different to the other grammars that are out there. The same goes to some extent for cases. You learn about the subject early on, and really about words going before a verb at least, the order of words and that kind of thing. Now, they explain that you're not going to actually word order in English is different to in Greek, and they explain all that sort of thing. But again, you're just not tagging these things with grammatical terms until much later. So when you actually do get to talk about the accusative case and the genitive case, you're well into chapters 30 and beyond before you even get the terms genitive and dative and so on introduced to you. So this is, like I said, normally you'd be dealing with those terms very early. This just makes this very, very accessible, I think, and makes it really easy to pick up and learn. If someone wanted to learn on their own, I think I would probably recommend this as a grammar you can work through on your own, well and truly above something like, Mounce, particularly above Mounce. I think Mounce is very technical. Mounce lets you down a little bit in the sense that he doesn't give you clear guidance about how to work through the material on a week-by-week basis, right? He assumes a classroom structure, and therefore you go into class, the teacher tells you how to do the study and that sort of thing. So, and that's all well and good, but if you're on your own, you don't really get that guidance. This comes with 2 pages of guidance with explanations right at the very beginning, so you're going to be able to look at how he suggests you learn the grammar. And I think, again, this is really helpful. If you're learning this on your own, this is designed really so that you can spend, let's say, 30 minutes a day sort of thing, and I think he would want you to work through multiple chapters a week. And it's not too bad to do that. It's 56, I think it is, chapters off the top of my head. And I think it's very doable to do 3 or 4 a week without too much trouble. I think, the chapters are all short, they're all simple, there's lots of repetition, so that even if you just go back and do a little bit of the last lesson again before you start, it's not going to hurt, and you're not going to be held up very much by doing that. And even if you don't do that, the concepts you learned in the last chapter are also going to come up in the chapter that you're doing in this particular day. So, you're going to be going over things over and over again. I think this helps with that reinforcement and the remembrance and recall of how the language is working. And again, I think this is one of the things that sets us apart. We don't get this in a lot of beginning Greek grammars. You don't normally get a professor who's going to explain to you, this is how I encourage you to structure your week, or how to use this book from a practical point of view, right? This also raises a question for me as a teacher of Greek. I know people do use this in the classroom, but I'm not sure how you would do that. This seems to me that it's actually written more as a self-study approach than it is a classroom approach. So I'm not sure how you as a professor would use this, because if you do use this in a classroom, the temptation is going to be to confuse the students by actually having them learn all the grammatical terms that he's deliberately trying to avoid you learning in these early stages. So it's probably one of those grammars that would work really well self-study, but may not work quite so well in a classroom environment. I don't know. If you've been through this grammar, I'd love to hear from you. Hit the comments down below and let me know what you thought of this, if you learnt this from this grammar at all, really. But particularly if you learned in a classroom environment, how did the professor use it? I'd love to hear from you down there. And if you haven't already done so and you're finding this helpful, hit the like button on this video so that YouTube knows this is a helpful video. Now, one of the other things I often look at when I come to a grammar is how soon does it get you into the text of the New Testament. Now, this grammar starts in about chapter 2, I think it is. You're translating 1 John 1 verse 1, just one verse, but that's not too bad. And then the next few chapters, most of the material that's in these few chapters, they're either made up or they're kind of echoing passages from the New Testament. And I think probably of all of the books, grammars that I've looked at, where they have kind of made up exercises, I think this has possibly got some of the better ones, mostly because you're repeating a lot of things, right? You're seeing things in different forms and repeating them, and that makes it really easy to identify them, based on what you've already seen. But also it means that you're seeing stuff that's very Johannine, very like John's writing, so that when you get into the gospel or when you get into 1 John, these texts are pretty straightforward. Now, in terms of the structure of this, really the first 23 chapters or thereabouts are you're learning the basics of sentence structure. Again, those first 23 chapters have almost no grammatical terms in them. Once you get into about chapter 24 and following, and I think from about chapter 30, you start to get some of those grammatical terms thrown in. Again, one per chapter, like it might be, these things are called participles. Now, you've been using these for ages, but now this is what they're called. Or these nouns with this ending, these are called nominatives or genitives or whatever it happens to be. When you get into some of the more technical things, and later in late chapter 30, early chapter 40s, you kind of starting to talk about things like genitive absolutes. Again, it's all very well written, easy to understand, and very clear in terms of the translation. So a couple of minor things I think are worth noting as you go through here. First of all, the index in the back is, I think, a little deficient. If you're a teacher and you're wanting to look up the section in the book where you find, say, the middle voice, well, you're out of luck. You're going to have to flick through the sections looking for that. Same goes with pretty much any subject. The table of contents is great. You're working through a whole bunch of Greek terms and you've got to decipher from the Greek term what you're looking at. Is he introducing the infinitive here? That's what the form will be for the chapter title. So you've got to look through and kind of to flick through this and find things quickly is not super easy. Now, again, if you don't care about that, it's probably not a big deal. And for most beginners, you probably don't know what, say, the middle voice is anyway, so you're not going to go look that up because you just don't know to. Speaking of middle voice, one other thing in this grammar that I thought is lacking really is a couple of elements around more modern understandings of the Greek. Now, here's the thing, right? This was published in 2005. This is, I think this is a reprint. It doesn't say anything in the copyright page about it being a reprint, but there's a publisher's note there to say that this edition used to come with a CD-ROM. Now it doesn't. Now you go to this website and download it. We haven't updated the text everywhere else. So if it says CD-ROM, just pretend we're talking about a website. Okay. So this was published in 2005 and this is largely a reprint, which means then that this was published prior to all the discussions about dependency, as well as time in the indicative hitting beginning Greek grammars as well. So that means then that really there's nothing in here about dependency, which is kind of good in one sense. At least I couldn't find anything on my looking through, refer back to my comments earlier about an index. So I didn't see anything about dependency per se. It does have a pretty nuanced understanding of the middle voice when it comes to, verbs that function on oneself, washing oneself and things like that, which is great. So in that sense, it doesn't even need to be updated. That's not really what I was going to talk about. I was going to mention though, that when it comes to some of these more modern discussions, there's nothing in here about verbal aspect. And this comes out, well, it's evident anyway, when you're looking at the way he talks about the present tense forms, when he talks about imperfect tense forms and so on. So you don't really have any of this discussion. He just explains, I mean, like I said, this is a really simple grammar. He's just telling you this is how to translate it. And you don't get any discussion about why you should translate it this way, or even that there's a discussion about this. Again, it's 2005, right? Nobody in a beginning Greek grammar in 2005 was talking much about verbal aspect. So it's not unusual for its time in that sense, but you want to be aware of this today, because if you're just translating the grammar as if there is time in the indicative, I think you want to be a little bit careful with this grammar. And there's something that you can probably fix once you've been through this grammar by going through something like The Basics of Verbal Aspect by Constantine Campbell, which would be a really good thing to do. And if you're interested in learning and finding out more about Constantine's Basics of Verbal Aspect, I'll leave a link to that just up here so you can click on that and find out more about that book, because it is worth going through after you've been through an older grammar like this one. So there's nothing about verbal aspect in it, and that's something to be aware of. And you are going to want to make sure you work all the way through this grammar. There's going to be a temptation to get to, say, into the 30s, chapter 30-ish, there's 56 chapters in this. You're going to get to that chapter and you're going to think, I pretty much know enough now. I think I can figure it out on my own here. And if you do that, you're going to run into trouble because there's still a lot of things to learn and he hasn't taught you much of the grammar at that stage, which means then if you're going to go and look at a commentary, like an exegetical commentary, well, you're not going to understand a lot of what he's talking about. And then, of course, if you're already reading Greek and working it out on your own, then going back to a grammar and saying, actually, I don't know what I'm talking about, is not very inspiring. So you're probably better off, make sure you finish this grammar before you say I've done enough, okay? Finish the grammar all the way to the end. And there are some things at the end that I think are really helpful as well. So that's it for John Dobson's Learn to Read New Testament or Learn New Testament Greek. If you want a grammar to learn by yourself, then you should strongly consider this. This will be going near the top of my grammar list. And if you're interested in my list of grammars, my ranking, you can see a list in the description below. Leave a link to that there so you can see where this sits in that. So this is well worth considering. You do want to, like I said, you want to finish it all the way to the end. You want to supplement it with something on verbal aspect when you're done. But other than that, this is a really good grammar. It's simple and easy, and it's going to be pretty straightforward to work through this. I think you could do this probably in 6 months without any trouble, and I think very likely even quicker than that, 4 months would be I think, quite doable for a grammar like this as well. So if you've been through this, I want to know, what do you think? Leave a comment in the description below. Let me know. I look forward to hearing from you there. If you found this video helpful, hit the like button. And if you haven't already done so, hit the subscribe button and the notify bell. And that way, when new videos like this come out, well, you'll be the first to know about it. And don't forget, if you are interested in learning Greek, and not just learning the basics, but going all the way through and mastering the New Testament so you can read it in Greek without any help, well, then go to this link here, masterntgreek.com/roadmap, and download your free roadmap to mastery today. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to keep taking small, consistent steps toward mastery. I'll see you later.